Welcome to the voices of transparency and excellence. We're not pivoting, the world is spinning like a top. Let's stop, figure things out, get some answers. Come with us on this ride. Warm regards, Rick and Judi.
Welcome to our podcast series where we address crucial topics impacting our campus and community. I'm Judi Brown Clarke, and I will be your host today because Rick Gatteau is on assignment. Today we're focusing on news literacy, and I have with me two incredibly charismatic thought leaders that can kind of unpack and understand a lot of the questions I know that our audience is thinking about. So with me today is Howard, but we'll call him Howie Schneider, Executive Director of the School of Communication and Journalism's Center for News Literacy, and Jonathan Anzalone, Assistant Director of the Center for the News Literacy, also here at Stony Brook. So I'm going to start off with kind of a broader question, and then we'll kind of drill down to actually unpacking the different complexities of it. So interesting enough, when we typed in to Google news literacy, the first website that came up on our search happened to be the Center for News Literacy at Stony Brook University. Now, I don't know what either of you paid to have that happen, but it was absolutely an incredible point of pride. So let's start off, Howie, with you on really kind of the foundation of how the center was actually created.
Yes, it's no coincidence that we came up first because we were first. So I arrived here to help start the newest journalism school in SUNY, and the first in SUNY and the newest in the country in 2006. I had been an editor at a major newspaper, and when I arrived, I took a detour. In planning the new school, which was designed initially to train journalists of the future, I discovered in teaching a course to non-journalism students that back in 2006, Judi, they were already confused and overwhelmed about what information they could trust and believe. And they would say to me, there's this new thing called YouTube, and I see these clips, and what can I make? Can I trust those clips? I went back to the then president of the university, Shirley Strum-Kenny, and I said to her, it is no longer sufficient for journalism schools in the 21st century just to train the journalists. If we don't spend an equal amount of attention training and preparing the news consumers of the future, they will not be able to make sense of the news and information they're getting. It will be bad for them. It will be bad for journalism. It will be bad for democracy. So back in 2006, we started the first university course in the nation in news literacy, which was designed to help students discern what information, news and information, they could basically rely on and trust. And that was back in 2006.
So, Jonathan, it's interesting when you think of almost 20 years of having this incredible forethought. And in those 19 years, there's been an influx of news sources. Can you talk about news literacy with this influx of news sources?
Judi, you hit on one of our key early foundational lessons, which is finding what we call the journalism neighborhood. The landscape of information is vast and confusing, and lines blur between different neighborhoods, different sections. And so before we begin to evaluate the quality of the journalism that we're receiving, we have to first spot journalism itself. And so that's an early skill we tried to build with our students. Define journalism, find it, distinguish it from the other kinds of information that are out there, whether it's raw information that hasn't been checked yet, hasn't been verified, whether it's propaganda coming from an agenda-driven political source, whether it's entertainment or advertising. So that has made the challenge of being news literate more it's created a greater challenge, but it's one that we try to equip students to confront head on.
And Judi, a major change for us has been the explosion in social media versus when we began. And so we know that most of our students and many Americans now are living in on social media. That's where they get their news. And one of the biggest confusions we have found is that when students are on social media, they believe they are getting their news from social media. They're not. I will say to a student, where do you get your news? And the student will say, I get it from YouTube. And I'll say, no, you don't. And they'll say, yes, I do. And I'll say, no, you don't. And I'll tell them they're getting it on YouTube, but it's coming from someplace else. So even the basic idea that one of the first lessons of news literacy is to know where the information is coming from. Who says, where is it coming from, is a very foundational lesson in becoming a much smarter news consumer.
When we think of how we become a critical thinker and discerning a large amount of information and kind of making sense of that. So now let's look at the reality of most citizens. Are you getting it in elementary school? Are you getting it in middle school? Are you getting it in high school? Where do we start to really help our consumers of knowledge develop the critical thinking skills to even understand that news source may have another agenda?
You know, when we started, Judi, we were focused like a laser beam on universities. And since we've started the Center for News Literacy back in 2006, we've shared our curriculum with 20 other universities, around 20. We've taught more than 11,000 students on campus. But a couple of years ago, John and I and others decided it's way, way, way too late to start in college. So we began a pilot program, and we are now partnering with 7 school districts on Long Island that are adapting and integrating our college curriculum into the required instruction of every student in their district, often beginning in middle school, high school, and there's one district you'll be happy to know that's starting in kindergarten. And they start this way. They start with the story of Chicken Little. Do you remember the story of Chicken?
I do.
Remember? You know, that hits the chicken on the head, the acorn. The chicken runs around telling all of the barnyard animals how terrible the sky's falling. They wind up with the fox. It's a very dark story at the end, and the kindergarten teacher starts raising awareness about the dangers of rumors and misinformation in kindergarten. We can't start early enough. That's my answer to your question.
So, Jonathan, one of the things that really came up with how we kind of using the context of a fable, it really is storytelling. And I don't think we used to be really good storytellers. And it used to be a thing where you actually, I remember my father, when we were going to bed at night, he would tell us a story. And I just learned the art of storytelling because he would do it in a way, and of course, it was always has a gotcha. So the art of storytelling, what's going on?
What's going on with the art of storytelling?
Yeah, what is going on?
Well, I think with our news literacy students, one of our aims is to try to see themselves as kind of central characters in this larger story. A larger story in which they have some power, because we find that a lot of our students feel overwhelmed, feel disenfranchised, disempowered, disconnected. And so we want to empower them to spot journalism, distinguish it from propaganda. We want to help them develop those skills so that they develop a sense of confidence that they don't become Chicken Little themselves. Or and another story that we use and we know teachers use is the story of the 3 little pigs, and how as it's traditionally told, the little pigs are victims of the big bad wolf. But about 30 years ago, a teacher wrote a book from the perspective of the wolf, and saying, well, I'm not a big bad wolf. It was just a misunderstanding. I wanted to bake a cake for my granny. The pigs insulted my grandmother. I sneezed and I blew down their houses. So it teaches them the importance of getting multiple perspectives, or what we call fairness or fair play.
I love it because I'm always putting something within the context of a fable. I love fables. But sometimes a story is told by the hunter, sometimes it's told by the bear. So talk a little bit, Howie, about kind of the context of who's telling the story and how the story is told.
Well, I think that's very important, that one of our basic principles here is the idea that students can discern for themselves what's reliable by breaking down a story. And one of the things we talk about is the difference between fairness and balance and bias. And fairness demands, fair play demands multiple perspectives. So we want students to understand when that is appropriate. Sometimes if a story has evidence that's overwhelming in one direction, there's no need for balance, but there's always a need for fairness. And that becomes very important. And the other thing, in terms of who's telling the story, it's a little different, is to distinguish between news and opinion, about fact and opinion. And you may think this is easy, but there was a study that we use in which a broad number of Americans were given 10 statements, Judi, 5 opinion statements and 5 statements of fact. And all they had to do was distinguish between the two. And John can correct me. I think only 35% of all of the respondents were able to distinguish the 5 factual statements. Okay? And that's because they wanted to believe what they wanted to believe. If a statement seemed to be true, they said it was true. So just understanding some of that is very important in becoming smarter and more engaging. And recognizing ultimately we have the power to decide what's reliable. You know, we, as John said, this idea we're overwhelmed by this flood of information and by all this noise we're getting constantly. And this battle for our attention, if we can slow down and apply the principles that we teach, we can be in charge of deciding what we can believe.
So that brings the question of the ability to slow down, the ability for discernment. It requires a level of self-discipline. So where exactly does that self-discipline seem to, who's coaching these individuals? Where is it coming from? What is your opinion?
Well, I think it has to come through practice.
Yeah.
And it's something that we're not well practiced in. But we can work backwards by showing them the consequences of acting too rashly, acting too quickly, where we can deceive people in our family, people in our social networks. And so there's an added responsibility on us as individuals, because we can't count on Twitter, X, whatever it's called. We can't count on them to do the job for us. The government is not going to swoop in and start filtering out fact from fiction. The responsibility is on our shoulders, and that's a burden, but it's also a great deal of power. And so we try to help students understand that the power of information, the responsibility that they have, not only as consumers, but we're all potentially publishers as well. If the ice cream truck is in my neighborhood, I take a picture of it, share it on social media. I just reported the news, and news that others can act on. So it has to come with practice. It has to come with embracing that power, that responsibility, and understanding that there are consequences for our choices, for our actions, for ourselves, and for people we care about.
But it's going to require deliberate action, because we are hardwired to react quickly as human beings, socially, quickly, and emotionally. That does not always serve us best when we're trying to make decisions about information. So in our coursework, we tell the students they have to consciously turn on the critical thinking part of their brain. Yeah. It will not be automatic. And so we work on it. We had an international conference here, Judi, because this is not an American issue.
Sure.
And we had some academics from 10 or 11 countries, and I think it was the group from Vietnam. They start their news literacy lessons through meditation. They have a meditation period to get their students to actually slow down as part of their training.
That is fascinating.
It is fascinating.
And I love kind of the cultural competency piece, and also just the way in which different cultures actually process information. And it does go back to kind of that having the discipline to quiet yourself and a real astute space to really think through the information you have and what your next actions are going to be. Fascinating.
Especially sharing information. So a red line for us, a red line. People say, when you talk about reliable information, what do you mean reliable? Okay? And we say reliable information is actionable. When do you have sufficient information to make a decision, reach a conclusion, take an action, or share that information with somebody else? That's the red line. We don't want our students sharing anything unless they have verified it and they have a high level of confidence, because the consequences are enormous. We have no idea when we share something. As John said, we are also publishers. It gets out there. And MIT did a study about how fast false information travels 6 times faster than real information. Once it gets out there, we can't get it back in time. So we got to stop it before it gets out.
You know what's really interesting is, remember back when you had an editor, like you'd write an article and there was an editor and the editor would want to fact check you and you couldn't publish things until there was like some ability to defend the information, the source, and so on. With that kind of safeguard now are no longer part of the dissemination of information. In your opinion, how have things changed?
Well, in some ways, I mean, things have democratized, and there are positive dimensions for that. More voices at the table, more people taking part in the process. But we teach our students to look for 3 things from an information provider. One is verification. They've taken pains to collect some kind of evidence or interview some knowledgeable source who could provide accurate information. They practice some measure of independence, so it's not a political activist representing a particular side, but rather somebody who stands apart and doesn't have a vested interest. And the third, and this is probably the least practiced of all, is accountability. So contrast somebody who has a professional obligation to put their name on their story and correct it if they make a mistake, as opposed to all the anonymous accounts that are out there on YouTube or on social media. And so we think that directing students toward those 3 principles will lead them in a positive direction, and it really creates a stark contrast between those who practice those 3 things, those information providers who practice those 3 things, and those who don't, because the numbers who don't, they're growing.
Man, I wish this were, I wish we were the king and queen of the world and that we could just make sure that these safeguards, these processes were in place.
We're not going to be able to go back. I was an editor for 25 years, okay? And I love, but the context of this discussion is that journalism itself is in crisis, economic crisis.
Absolutely.
The internet has so disrupted the economic model, and that's a huge problem. So even if news organizations wanted to perform this function, they can't. And in terms of social media, people say, why can't Facebook filter out all the misinformation? There are 3 billion users of Facebook in the world. I mean, you can't filter and edit that. So we have to become our own filters. That's really what we're talking about.
Well, and the hard thing is salacious information gets hits, and hits translate to funding.
Absolutely.
And so this economic model right now, what's being rewarded within information and news and so on, it's got to be incredibly challenging.
It is, because it rewards outrage, it rewards emotion, it rewards conflict, and you can see how toxic this is to our society.
Yeah.
Which is why the real goal is to make sure that every student who graduates from a high school in America is equipped with these skills as a core competency in the 21st century. And we are hoping that New York will join 4 other states that have already made this happen.
What would that entitle?
That would entitle changing the graduation requirements and saying that if a student from New York graduates from any of the high schools, they will have to have some level of mastery in media and news literacy. California's doing it. New Jersey's doing it. Massachusetts is about to do it. And we're trying to help push New York in that direction.
All right. I'm going to expound on that because I think right now, one of the challenges to higher education and to STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, to our medical education and quite frankly, the medical community is we're not good communicators. And we haven't done a very good job of really talking about kitchen table issues with very complex technical science and research. So when you think about it from a news literacy and really translating across the entire campus community, I think not only just within journalism, but how do we embrace that as a workforce core skill into what would be considered core and central to higher education?
Well, news literacy is open to students from all disciplines, and among those 11,000 that Howie mentioned that we've taught, they've come from all different disciplines, and we've received interest. Not all of it has led to a product or action, but we received interest from SOMAS, from other departments who want.
What does SOMAS stand for our
School
listeners?
of Oceanic. I always get it wrong.
Marine
and Atmospheric Sciences. Yes. About collaborating on courses or lessons, working with the libraries. So one of the benefits of news literacy is that it overlaps with literally everything.
Yes.
Whether you're in business, whether you're in science, we want everyone benefits from having consumers of that information being more critical, being more astute, being able to ask good questions, and it also improves the way we relate to our audience, and breaking down the jargon or doing away with the jargon so that we can communicate based on facts, based on a shared understanding. And there's currently discussions on campus for some kind of civic discourse requirement for students. And I'll be at the table on Wednesday when we have those discussions. And news literacy fits perfectly in that as well. And that's where it often an entry, where it enters into high schools as well. Yeah. A number of schools offer ACE courses, Accelerated College Experience courses, where they can earn college credit at the high school level. And about 15 high schools locally offer a news literacy version, and the way they justify that is through their participation in government course. So it's about understanding the world and understanding each other as best we can.
Would you like to add on to that, Howie?
No, my hope is that this will become a requirement. I was hoping at one point that Stony Brook would be the first university in the country to require this. This is very dangerous to say, so very dangerous. Require this of every student in our university. We would be a model for the United States. Short of that, we need to scale this as much as we can. But as John said, and I say this advisedly, news literacy is very promiscuous. It can marry with any discipline. Yeah. And it's a foundational skill. It's the basis of everything. If we can't make good decisions about information, what's going to happen? I mean, as a society in disciplines, it's a core competency for everybody.
How do we create civil conversations with information and the opportunity where people are listening for learning, not listening to debate? What are some of the ways in which we can use this news literacy strategies around some of those more informal settings?
Well, one of our priorities, and this is a complex question and a complicated lesson, so it comes kind of in the middle of the semester, is that we try to push students to acknowledge their own biases, and we have them take a test called Project Implicit, where which has them associate positives or negatives with certain images or certain concepts. They could be political, it could be gender, and so on. So that's one way to begin to reflect on where they're coming from as individuals, because we like to think that, I'm an objective observer of the world. It's everyone else's who's biased. So it's an opportunity for us to kind of reflect on our own internal mechanism and how we think and how we view the world. And then from there, we have students challenge themselves. And we have a couple of exercises where we have them go to this section of the New York Times called Overlooked, where they're kind of doing this massive correction of, throughout the years, there are a number of prominent people of color and other marginalized categories who did not get obituaries in the New York Times simply because of the color of their skin or their gender or their sex. And so the New York Times is trying to correct that. And so we have students go and read some of them and reflect on, well, how come they didn't get an obituary in the first place? And then we also have a list of a variety of news outlets that try to correct the mainstream media's oversights. For example, Indian Country Today, which covers news of interest to Native American communities, or Capital B in Black. And we also have some that are partisan. Jacobin, a socialist magazine, reads in a libertarian magazine. And we say, identify like what camp you're in and pick two from these lists in which you'll challenge yourself. And then reflect on what you learned, what you've been missing from your news diet. And so an exercise like that, we hope, helps them at least, think about what's beyond their own bubble.
But as far as the kitchen table,
Yeah.
where we're not at the university, you've got to basically stand up for facts. There are not two truths in the world. There's one truth. There may be perspectives about that truth, or there may be a failure to acknowledge that truth. But a fact is a fact. And, our former Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan famously promoted the idea that everyone's entitled to their own opinions but not their own facts. So when I am confronted, and I am with relatives who have viewpoints or have information that seems, to be inaccurate or so partisan, I'm not going to get emotional. But my first question is always, where did you hear that? Where did you get that information? Give me the source. And that starts the conversation with, how do you support this? I'm not challenging your intelligence.
Yeah.
I'm saying, let's start with the same playing field, that when we talk, we should be talking about how do we support our arguments. Sometimes there's no support. It's a matter of opinion. I get that. But where people are making arguments, they should support those arguments. And we should know what the sources are. Where did you get that from? Can I see that? Okay? Let me show you something. And I think that's a starting point for people to be, to begin to have real conversations with each other.
And I appreciate that discernment between your opinion and information,
That's
fact,
facts.
and so on.
Absolutely.
Right.
And we have to stand up for facts.
Yep. All right. So as we're growing into this incredible ecosystem of technology and information, one of the real core skills will be to how to ask a good question. So I'm going to start with you, Howie. How do you teach someone how to ask a good question?
Well, you start with curiosity, and you start with stimulating, what they can do. When we do our news literacy, one of the key points is we ask students, as they kind of deconstruct the story and break it into parts, we ask them, what questions are not answered in the story? One thing that we are not good at anymore is close reading. People don't close read. We're all reading on our phones and we're skimming. So in order to really ask questions, you have to really look at something carefully. And so we require the students to say, are there things missing from this story? The old who, what, when, where, why, how. What's missing? What additional information do you need? I want to go back to what John said. This is practice, Judi.
Yes, it is.
You've got to get students to start this, and you got to start it when they're 11, and it's got to be built into their DNA.
Again, it is the practice. And so to our listeners who may not be in college, they're not sitting in a course, what can one do that puts them in the context of really developing these skills and refining these skills, creating muscle memory around these skills? What would you advise our audience to do?
We have a number of, to be self-promotional for a moment,
Sure.
we have a number of free resources we make available. We have our Digital Resource Center.
And where are these resources?
The website for that is digitalresource.center. Also linked to on the Center for News Literacy's webpage, centerfornewsliteracy.org, where we share our course lessons, our undergraduate course lessons. During the academic year, I send out a mass email to our subscribers, over 300, with sharing our PowerPoints, our courses hybrids, so I share our video lessons, our readings. So we offer a number of resources. We published an undergraduate textbook a few years ago that's online. It's being used by a couple of other colleges right now. We also developed, I think it was back in, I'll forget the year, but
okay.
Several years ago, we also developed a free open online course on the platform Coursera. It's called Making Sense of the News. And we collaborated with our partners in Hong Kong and Australia to develop these kind of digestible mini lessons. The videos are, I think the longest one is 8 minutes. Most are in the 3 to 4 minute range, to get a taste of news literacy and to begin to develop those skills. Because to get back to this point about practice, news literacy, and we tell our students this on day one, has more than just an academic value, a grade. It's about affecting their everyday lives. How do they develop their critical thinking skills so that they're better consumers, so that they're better citizens, so that they're better providers of information to the people in their social network? So grab some of our resources, work with their local libraries, and start practicing news literacy, and it'll become second nature.
We do workshops, Judi, for community. We do workshops for library groups, for business groups. And that Coursera course that John mentioned, in case you're interested, is in 4 languages. If you speak Polish, Chinese, Spanish, or English, you can access that course on Coursera.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you both, Howie, Jonathan. Thank you both for sharing your insight today. We hope our listeners find these discussions informative and empowering as we navigate these times together. Thank you again for all my guests and their valuable contribution. Join us next time as we explore college athletics in today's society. I'm Judi Brown Clarke, and thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.